hoping, okay, the mic is working now. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight at the Danto Lecture Hall. It's been recently renovated, so ADA accessible, really nice feeling now with elevated stage. So I hope that you enjoy the new space, and we are very grateful for the team to really remodel it and make it accessible for everybody. I am Salvador Salort. I'm the director of the DIA, and I have really the pleasure to welcome all of you to the DIA's inaugural lecture for the Native American art collection. So Native American art is a really important part of what we collect here in Detroit, and also it's very important for us to install it in the best possible way. We know that many schools come to the museum to see the Native American collection. It's very important as we share our knowledge, our collection, and many other things with our educators, but also with the general public. For many years, the DIA didn't have, unfortunately, a curator of Native American art, and in 2019, we hired Dr. Denise de Quintal, and since then, she's done a phenomenal work. She really brought new talent and expertise and helped us refocus our collecting efforts with contemporary Native American art. She still is looking for other areas to continue strengthen the collection, but Native American contemporary was the main driver. And in the almost 5 years, four and a half, that with Dr. de Quintal has been with us, you know, she's made incredible acquisitions for the collection. So in this context of contemporary Native American art, and reflective of all the work that Dr. de Quintal has done, we have Preston Singletary today as the speaker for this inaugural lecture. Artist Singletary, where are you? Can't see. There you are. Has been present in our collection since 2012, when the Contemporary Art Department purchased a Spirit Box, one of the favorites for many of our visitors. It's really amazing how it looks in our galleries. And in 2021, through very generous donations of Carlene Van Voorheers and Alan and Marcia Doctor, respectively, the museum acquired Loon and the Blind Man and Wolf Hat. So right now we have three works by Preston, which is amazing, and really spanning 25 years of his making as an artist and help us understand his progressions, his ideas, and a great aspect of Native American contemporary art. We are very grateful to Carlene Van Voorhees for the support, sponsoring this lecture. And with that, I'd just like all of you to help me welcome Dr. Denise de Quintal to the podium to introduce our speaker.
Good evening, everyone. As Salvador said, my name is Dr. Denise de Quintal, and I'm the Assistant Curator for Native American Art. Preston Singletary's art has become synonymous with the relationship between Tlingit culture and fine art. Through teaching and collaborating in class with other Native American, Maori, Hawaiian, and Australian Aboriginal artists, he says that he, quote, has come to see that glass brings another dimension to Indigenous art. The artistic perspective of Indigenous people reflects a unique and vital visual language that has connections to the ancient codes and symbols of the land. And this interaction has informed and inspired his work, end quote. 40 years of glass making, creating music, and working together with elders has put him in a position of being a keeper of knowledge, while forging new directions in new materials and conceptions of indigenous arts. His works are featured in many museums, including the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, the Seattle Art Museum, the British Museum, the National Museum of the American Indian, as well as the Detroit Institute of Arts. It is with great pleasure that I introduce one of the most phenomenal artists practicing today to give his lecture, Eagle's Journey with Raven, Preston Singletary.
Preston, ach sayi, Tlingit, Gainach, Cochain do Salk, Kagwantana, Hutsati, Seattle Kwana Achat. Now that I've exhausted my knowledge of the Tlingit language, I will proceed in English. That's a brief introduction. Of course, I've focused most of my effort on the visual arts, and I can't do everything. I've gotten to the age where I realize that you can only get good at so many things. So I am a Tlingit tribal member. I'm from the Kagwantan house group, the Eagle Moiety, the Kilauea clan from Sitka, Alaska. This is, but I grew up in the Seattle area. I grew up around glass artists. So is to say, well, my great-grandmother moved to Seattle in the 20s and brought the whole family with her. For those of you maybe know the geography of Alaska, but the Tlingit territory is here in the southeast of Alaska. Of course, goes quite broadly up into the north and to the west, but so we call it Southeast Alaska, and as I mentioned, Sitka is where my great-grandmother came from. And this is a picture of her very early on, turn of the century, and she's the woman in the center of the photograph here. It was a traditional arranged wedding, marriage, which was the custom of the time. And she was widowed in 1919 with 5 children, one of which was my grandmother. She married this man, Dionisio Gubatayo, who's this Filipino man from who had traveled to Alaska for the fishing industry and canning and what have you. So they married and moved to Seattle in 1923. And had more children, and most of the elders of my family have passed on the Tlingit Filipino. But actually, in turn, my grandmother, she also married a Filipino, so technically I'm a Tlingapino. And so that matrilineal, lineage still links directly to me. And so I have since taken it on quite seriously and studied and learned about my culture, mostly through books. Growing up in Seattle, I grew up outside of the region for the Tlingit culture up there in Alaska. And this was a trip up there. The Kagwantan I mentioned is our house group, so I guess that is our street that we own. But I traveled the world with my work, and in 1993, I met this woman who was from Sweden, and we got married in 1995. And we had these 2 kids, which they're much older now. They're 21 and 23. So anyway, it's hard to resist using that photo. So when I was growing up, I was planning on being a rock musician. That was my chosen profession, rock star. But so after many, many years of trying to make it as a musician, I kind of fell back on my art career. that was probably in the late 80s. But in 1982, I started blowing glass as a result of the eruption of Mount St. Helens. There was a glass studio in Seattle that would take the ash from the mountain and would melt it and make glass from it, because the basis of glass is silica. So they had quite a product line that was quite popular all across the country, and I got I got a job in a factory. And this is later, but my training was really in the Glass Eye Studios, which Benjamin Moore here, the fellow in the center, standing next to me, he bought the building where the Glass Eye was, and I always say that he bought the furnaces and the kilns and me. So I kind of came with the shop, so to speak. And I started working with him, and he was the artistic director of Pilchuck Glass School, which is an international glass school north of Seattle. It was founded by Dale Chihuly. But this guy on the left here, that's Dante Marioni. So Dante is quite established as a glass blower, a glass artist, but he and I were friends from high school. So he kind of nudged me into glass blowing in '82, and I got the job in the factory, and we started going to the Pilchuck Glass School and learning how artists work with glass, and we met this fellow here, Lino Tagliapietra, is the Italian master, who we befriended, and learned a lot from him. He spent many years coming to Seattle and teaching at Pilchuck and traveling around the country, but here we are up at the Pilchuck Glass School working for artists. A lot of what we do as glass blowers is work with other people or for other people, executing their ideas. And so I spent many years working as an assistant on Benjamin's team. We worked with many, many different glass artists. Every week was a new artist coming through the studio. With Dan Daly or Richard Royal or Lino, or we'd work with Benjamin or Dante's work. And here we're working with Dale Chihuly when he started this series of Venetian, he calls them the Venetian series. So that was a time when we'd conjoin the two teams and we would all come together and work on as one big team. And it was really amazing because we were, this was, late 80s, early 90s, and this was just, becoming this new exciting medium to be involved with, and I found myself kind of in the eye of the hurricane. These were the earliest things that I did, just learning how to work with glass, how to control the glass, and these are quite large. They're like 24 inches tall, so they're pretty big in terms of blown glass forms, but this was, pretty much reflective of the people that I was working around and the people that I was influenced by, working with these classical vessel forms. But more specifically, I kind of felt like they reflected the modernist, decorative art of, the 30s and 40s. So these are the things that I was working on. This was actually after I spent some time in Sweden, so I felt like they kind of had a Swedish sensibility, but they also were kind of Italian in their process. And these were inspired by an Italian designer named Napoleon Martinuzzi. So I call these the Prestonuzzi series. But so, and anybody who may know Dante's work knows that, we were kids off the same block, and a lot of people would ask me, oh, did Dante make these? And I said, no, I made them, So it was I found it really hard to distinguish myself in this way, making these vessel forms. And so I started to endeavor to, and this was about 1988, so only a few years after I started working with glass, I started to dabble in the design work of the Tlingit style. And I met this guy in the summer of 2000. This is Joe David, is one of my most important mentors to me. He shared with me, he kind of initiated me in the sweat lodge ceremony. He agreed to be an artist in residence at the Pilchuck School, and he told me, yeah, I'll come up there, but I want to build a sweat lodge. And I said, sure. Well, I was asked him if, they would be willing to let us do that. And he told everybody it's going to be a suffering and sacrifice ceremony. And those of, who are interested, come talk to him. And he would, after looking into their eyes and telling them what they needed to know, then, let you know if you're ready to do this ceremony. And I'd never done it before, and I was kind of apprehensive. I was very nervous. I said, Joe, you got to look into my eyes and tell me, am I ready for this? And he goes, well, let me put it this way. He goes, you better be. You better be. And so in that summer of 2000, when we were at Pilchuck and I was helping him make glass, and we built this structure, and in 11 days' time, we did 4 ceremonies. And then at the end of the 4th ceremony, that evening when we were departing, he gave me a name from the Nuu-chah-nulth culture, where he comes from, the west coast of Vancouver Island. And that name is Kakawin-Keith, means transforming killer whale. So anyways, that had a deep significance in my career. It kind of affirmed, that I was on the right path, that I was doing the thing that I should be doing. And so now I've connected much more deeply to it, and I have this sort of idea that this genetic memory is kind of awakening in me. And he introduced me to this sweat lodge ceremony, and it was really about native spirituality. And I wasn't raised with any religious instruction, so this really, it had a profound impact on me. And we spent 10 years doing sweats up on the hill. But anyways, so just to kind of show you how this evolved for me, I first started looking at traditional objects and then trying to figure out, can I make this in glass? And so, this hat form, this is typically what they look like. They're made out of cedar bark, and they're woven. And I told this story earlier to some of the folks here at the museum and in the collections. And so when I was working with Benjamin, we always had a holiday open house, and we would, had made things, and so we pull it all together, and Benjamin had this little beautiful area with like pedestals and beautiful lights and everything, and we, the assistants, would have a card table over in the corner, and my aunt came to see what I was, support us and see what I was working on. She said, well, can we take this hat and put it on the, on this pedestal with all the nice lights? And I said, oh yeah, sure. So we took Benny's piece down, and we put the hat on. About 10 people gathered around me, and when I put it on the table, and these shadows fell through, and everybody was like, oh, look at that. It was like, how much is that piece? And I looked at it and I said, well, yeah, that's what I intended all along. So it was a complete eureka moment for me, which kind of pointed, it showed me that I was onto something. And so I kept pushing. As my skills evolved, working on, different kinds of forms, these mask forms. So really what I was trying to do is replicate the traditional object in glass as best I could. And so, this is kind of a random selection in a broad 30-year period, but as my skills evolved, I could make these much more complex forms and very detailed kinds of shapes. And so these are shaman's rattles. These are healing implements, and to me that sort of represents the spirituality of the tribe. And so there's lots and lots of discussion about intellectual property. A lot of these symbols, the eagle and the raven and the killer whale, they all pertain to certain families. And so I felt by working with these more expressive kinds of forms that it was a little less, it was a little more ambiguous. So I spent a lot of time doing that and kind of inventing my own sort of mythologies around these objects. It was in 2001, the year after I met Joe David, that this project was already underway, the founders, Pilchuck founders totem pole. And I had a friend of mine named David Svensson, who was actually one of my first mentors I met in 1988, and he had spent many, many years up in Haines, Alaska, working with Tlingit carvers. And he was a skilled carver himself, even though he was non-native. But he was trained by the Tlingit carvers up there. And so when I met him in '88, he pulled out these photos, and we just, he says, with your family background, this could be really something for you. So David had the idea, had been involved with Pilchuck for a long time, and he had the idea of making a totem pole for the Pilchuck Glass School. And the school was kind of in a state of flux, and I pitched the idea at this big community meeting for the school. We were trying to figure out a new director and all this stuff, and it was sort of like everybody was, well, anyway, in between directors, the one director left, and I won't say why, but anyways, everybody was all up in arms about the schools changing, and I said, and my little agenda thing was like, I think we should make a totem pole for the school. And this big sort of air came into the room, and everybody, and so they agreed to do it. They pitched it to the board, and we wanted to honor the founders of the Pilchuck Glass School, because John Halberg was the heir to Weyerhaeuser, and he donated the land where Pilchuck is situated. So he donated this tree farm to Dale Chihuly and to get this school founded. And then, of course, Dale Chihuly, let's see. Okay, anyway, so we worked on this, I'll tell this story in a sec here, but we carved it up in Haines, we sent it down to the Pilchuck School, and then we all came together as a school to make this, or put the finishing touches on this totem pole. So this was John Halberg here. He's holding this tina, which is a money piece, and this dagger was a dagger that he had actually, so he donated his Native American collection to the Seattle Art Museum, but there was one piece he couldn't figure out the provenance of it or how it was acquired. It turned out that it was probably stolen, and so he ended up with it in his collection, and he repatriated it to a family in Angoon, and so he was adopted and given a Tlingit name. So for all these reasons, we thought, a cedar monument representing the founders of the school, Dale Chihuly holding on to the wings of Raven, whereas Raven brought the sun to the world, Dale Chihuly brought Pilchuck to the world. And so this is Dale, and of course, most of you might know that he's, he has a patch on his eye. So we, instead of doing that, we gave it this glass vision, the vision of the school. And then we illuminated these glass castings with multicolored neon tubes. And so that became another kind of rite of passage for me, being at the Pilchuck Glass School, where I discovered myself as an artist, and everything just kind of fell into place. It was just, a very remarkable moment. And so anyway, back to my studio practice here. I have a studio in Seattle. These are two of my main assistants that work with me. I have 4 of them. But these 2 ladies have been with me for about 17 years, helping me execute pretty much every piece in my studio. So I have a glass blowing facility there. I'm working a couple days a week, but to be honest, a lot of the work that I do happens after the glass has cooled. So I can make a given number of pieces in a day, but then I have to carve all of these details into the form. which I do with the sandblasting process. So this is a glass object that's been covered with this green tape, this rubber tape that allows me to draw directly onto the form. And then the folks that I work with will help me cut out the stencil, so they're following my design, lifting out the areas of tape that are going to be sandblasted. So I work with glass in generally in two colors, inside and the outside. So I'm actually carving through layers of color to create establish the design work. So all of these areas will be sandblasted, and they won't be black, but they'll be another color. So lots of different techniques, creating like this basket-like texture, and then running it into the sandblaster where Terry sort of like slowly wear the surface of the glass down to create the design. And so probably mid-2000s or so, I started attending these indigenous artist gatherings, and they were Native North American, Hawaiian, and Maori people all coming together. And I don't know how I got invited. So I just showed up. They say, you show up, you get yourself there, we'll take care of you, we'll feed you, and you can make art with all these other people. So these gatherings were quite profound. They were really, it's hard to overstate, how, connecting with other indigenous people from around the globe, and, comparing stories. You all have a lot of similar experiences in our culture, in our history. Sometimes I get to blow glass there. We had a little mobile studio that we set up on Hawaii. As well as, I went to New Zealand a few years later and connected with the Maori people. I mean, the Maori people are just amazing, just like super, super, unified and organized and progressive and educated. And, here they're trying to show me how to do the haka, the war dance. Doing my best to look like a Maori warrior there. But just really genuine people just would, give you the shirt off their back. I mean, just really inspiring to be around them. Incredible times. I was on a cultural art exchange, went down to Australia and worked with this man, got to visit this man, Jamboa Marwili, who's a cultural leader in the Northern Territory. And so I invited him back to my studio, and he, came in December, the coldest month of the year, and it was the hottest time of the year in his, region. I understood that, even like 70 degrees was kind of cold for him, compared to where he comes from. So working with these folks, more about the collaborations. I spent a lot of time in New Mexico, and I have befriended many artists down there. And Jody Naranjo is one that I've been working with for several years. So usually when I work with another artist, I ask them to sort of take the lead in what kind of shapes we want to work on. So of course these Pueblo pottery forms were kind of where we started with these. The kind of goes right back to the vessel making era when I was working with all of my, my friends in Seattle in the early days. And so then they kind of take the lead in what kind of designs are going to go on these pieces. Of course, working with Joe David is always a treat. We continue to work together when we can. And usually what happens is when I work with another artist, it kind of pushes me into, trying things that I've never tried before, and sculpting or shaping the glass in different ways. And so it's always a real joy to work with other people. And not only that, other indigenous people, and not only that, I learn how they create artwork for today's world, today's market. A lot of the work that I would make, or historically was made, would go back into the community, right? But today it goes to collectors and people take it home, and it doesn't, they have a profound appreciation for it. But I believe it's because that these represent these ancient codes and symbols to the land. And so there's a power there that I feel like we're tapping into. And so, so that's kind of how I feel about working with other Indigenous people. Dante and I, we're known each other for 45 years or so. We never collaborated until we started making a few things here. One of the galleries that we both work with prompted us to say, you guys have never collaborated. And it was true. We had never made things. We'd worked together for many, many years, but we'd never signed a piece together. So this was, some of his handiwork in terms of working with these canes and these this Italian process of working with glass. And so there's another example of getting outside of my comfort zone is Harlan Rayano. He was trying to ask me to make these clown figures, and they were super challenging, but all the while I'm learning new things. Tammy Garcia also, she was the first one that I collaborated with, and because of the popularity and strength of her work, we were able to get the Native American art collector to appreciate the material of glass. Prior to that, it was always a tough sell. I mean, it was, well, it's not traditional, it's not, the way things were always done. And of course, I believe that's more of an anthropological point of view. Oh, this is another Harlan piece. And this is a Jody, or a Tammy piece. But so it also did me a big service by, finding a whole new audience. In this contemporary Native art market down in Santa Fe. This is one of my favorite collaborations with Lewis Gardner. He's a Maori jade carver. The green stone that you see here is, some of his work, how he works. And so we made glass objects, and we would compare stories from our respective cultures. And they've got the waka, their canoes. We have our dugout canoes. So we have, just an amazing time working, and these pieces were really special in my opinion. And I get to work with people like this. Marcus Ammerman is Choctaw, and so we were looking at Choctaw, mound builder culture objects. And so trying some of these new techniques I was discovering, and sculptural techniques. Lisa Telford is a Haida weaver, and so there was always a tradition of weaving on glass bottles. Many cultures did that. Of course, for Indigenous people to have a glass bottle, that was pretty special, So if you put, cedar weaving around, it's kind of like a really fancy cozy for your bottle. So we tried it on some art objects, and we called this one Foam Woman, which is relates to the Haida creation myth. And these are also really special pieces, in my opinion. Raven Sky River is also part Tlingit, but he is a really super talented sculptor, and he focuses on aquatic life. And so I had an opportunity to design work on, put some designs on some of his work, and so we built it as a collaboration. I didn't go to art school. I wasn't trained formally. My punchline is, did you go to school? And I said, well, I got my doctorate from, University of Puget Sound. They look at me and say, what's an honorary degree? So it gives all full rights and benefits, whatever they are, as being a doctor of art. But anyways, I didn't study art in a formal way, but I did, I had an affinity to surrealist art, Dada, surrealism, abstract art, and come to realize that was that these modernists, well, there was a native scholar named Renard Strickland who wrote, it's ironic that the modernists such as Rothko and Henry Moore and Picasso and that forced us to look at the primitive, as he called it, and appreciate differing levels of reality. So, so this whole genre of primitivism, snuck up on me, and then I started reading about that, and there was a lot of dialogue which I really found inspiring. And so sometimes when I'm looking at modernist sculpture, I try to bring that into my work and sort of turn the tables on the modernists and be inspired by what they do, or what they did. And so, yeah, playing with some level of abstraction and sort of, anatomically these things are all kind of turned upside down, and so I've just found a lot of fun, playing with that. And so some of these pieces I would, liken to a Noguchi, so to speak, but it's ornamented with Northwest Coast style. So just kind of playing with different compositions and different ideas, different sculptural techniques. It's kind of where I found myself. So I still go back and forth between making, a recognizable object or making a totem pole form or making, a hat on occasion. But this was a big phase for me. Well, I'm still on that phase, I guess, working with these kinds of forms and trying to explore new ways of working and interpreting these designs. So, and then also, kind of getting into contemporary themes. This is based on, I have a band still called Kuik, and this was based on a story where Raven, just comes back home from a long journey, and he comes, instead of big trees, he sees these big buildings. And so he has, here he's sort of communing with this log that, is full of all this heaviness. And, it's a metaphor, for the culture and how it's changing. And then sometimes it's just simply about design work. Sometimes as Joe David would call some of his work, he says, this piece is wonderfully non-representational. And so I kind of play, so I go with that too. It's like, what is it? What is that? What are all those little things in there? It's like, well, only the artist knows for sure. And so but you see this is typical in Northwest Coast art. You see all these eyes and, figures emerging. And then still I try to go back into this kind of surrealist mode and play with this juxtaposition here. And, revisiting, as my skills increase, then I can make these pieces better and better. So I have a lot of fun. Just, every day is an adventure going to work. Like, what am I going to do today? Sometimes I just don't know, and I'll just put a line down, and I'll have to build off that line. And or some days I go in with a specific idea of what I want to do. But oftentimes it's just kind of on the fly. These are some of the newest pieces I've done. So I'm kind of branching out with these, winged forms, and then playing with this really traditional sculpted raven head here to bring more of the carving style into the form. And then this is kind of an obvious nod to modernism with kind of the Calder stabilia. This one's a woodpecker. But God, there's so much to talk about, and sometimes I just don't know where to start and stop. I just came back from the Czech Republic, and I was working with this artist out there. This was I started going there about 10 years ago, and having some of my work cast in the Czech Republic. But this fellow here, Martin Janicki, on the right, or on the left, he super talented glassmaker, just opened up a studio in like 2019, and so we've been friends for a long time, and he wanted to work with me, and so he's really talented at making these sculpted heads, and so and these faces very expressive. And he goes, well, if I make a head, it's just going to look like some old bald Czech guy, And I said, well, let's look at some native faces. Let's look at some of these. Can you mimic this look and this of this person's face, or Princess Angeline is Chief Seattle's daughter here. So we started working on a new series, but this guy here has helped me achieve some of these totem pole forms. This is a 7.5-foot sculpture, weighs about 2,000 pounds. This was a story of my great-grandmother. She had a pet bear as a child. So here it is in full scale, and you can see the little bear up on the top. So that's the tradition. A totem pole should tell a story. That's its purpose. It's because we come from an oral tradition. It's a visual language, and so this was how I paid homage to my great-grandmother. This is the wood carver's totem. This is all the different, wood people, you've got the woodpecker, you've got the woodworm, you've got the human carver and the beaver. They all carve wood. And this is, so this was a newer one that I called Meditations with Fire. So I don't know if you can see in the center, there's me, I'm holding a glass blowing pipe. So, and then on the bottom figure is an octopus, which represents the, molten flowy glass. And then you got the eagle on top. And nestled in there is a sort of an homage to a dear friend of mine who passed away. He was my assistant for 20 years. He passed away from brain cancer, so I put him in there as a shaman figure. And then you got the sun on top, which, is the fire that brings, helps us with the glasswork and all of that. So now I'm sort of bringing in these more personal narratives around these totems. This is the second one that I did, and this is about 2,800 pounds, and it's, killer whale, which is my family symbol. Opening up next week in Oklahoma City is Raven in the Box of Daylight. This was an exhibition I put together, which is, let's see, I don't know if this is going to turn on here. Oh yeah, so I kind of created this exhibition as an immersive experience. So I created sort of this video backdrop, and it illustrates the whole story of how Raven, who was a white bird in the beginning of time, he went to learned from the fishermen of the Night River, or fishermen of the night, learned about this old man who was asking where the daylight was, and so he heard about this old man who had these objects in his clan house at the head of the Nass River. And his daughter was she was transparent, had no name, but so these things I learned about the story I brought into the narrative. And so, kind of long story short, Raven has a power of transformation. So he transformed himself eventually into a hemlock needle, and he floated down the river, and the daughter scooped up the water from this river or natural spring, and the raven was on the rim of that ladle, and so she swallowed it, and she became pregnant. Raven was now inside of her, and he transforms into a human child, and she gives birth to him as a human child. And Raven had tried to appeal to the old man and say, hey, let me come in and hang out in your clan house, and he was not allowed. So this is how he gets into the clan house. This was, is that one? I thought that was video. Anyway, so there's lots of video elements here that, helping create a backdrop. So now he's inside the clan house, and here's the old man and his wife. And so he's kind of snooping around. He's a very precocious, mischievous child. He ends up, let's see if that was the one. Okay. So he finds these boxes one by one. He takes the boxes and he's playing with them. And first he plays with the stars and he throws them up through the smoke hole in the center of the clan house. Next he, plays with the box that contains the moon. And each time, he's taking these things and he kind of, tossing them up into the sky. And the old man's getting really, upset with him. It's like it scolds him, reprimands him. Finally, he's pointing to this last box, and the old man's like, "No way, you're not going to get that box." And so the Raven's child, he starts to cry and scream, and he refuses to eat, and he gets really sick, and weak. And the daughter goes to the old man and said, "Is there anything more important than your grandson?" And he said, "Of course you're right." So he put the box down in front of the child, and he transforms back into Raven, and he brings daylight out into the world. And so with this flash of light, the people who were living in darkness, they became the forest animals, they became the sea life, they became the birds. Some of them jumped into the sky. And the people that stood up strong and proud or bewildered and didn't know what else to do became the human beings. So so it goes both ways, sometimes, strong and proud, or like, what's going on? So anyways, that's a little bit about that story. And that was kind of like my, a major endeavor that it took me about 3 or 4 years to make. But there's always my band. So, I feel like, those actors like, "Hey, you like my movies, but you haven't heard my band yet." So anyway, I started to think about what I was doing with my visual art, and I started to think, oh, maybe I should work with some Native musicians. And so I've always wanted to make this Native funk group, because there's all varieties of Native music. You've got world beat, you've got jazz, you've got blues, you've got reggae, and all of that, and rock. And so I said, well, there's no Native funk group, so I need to make one. And so I met this guy named Bernie Worrell, who is actually the keyboard player for Parliament Funkadelic. And this was a cool story because I paid into a Kickstarter campaign when I turned 50 about 10 years ago. And so that Kickstarter he bought a tour bus and then he drove it to Seattle, and I met him and we opened up for him. My band, Little Big Band, opened up for his band. And then when we were parting ways, he said, I've been thinking about your music and we got to get together and work on some stuff. And I was like, oh, wait, you're talking to me? It's like, boy, that was the best birthday present ever. So we spent 3 years working on this series of albums. Each album is like a 3-album compilation. Well, 3 albums in one. And so, unfortunately, Bernie passed away in 2016, but, as I always wanted to be a rock star, I haven't become one, but I have the photos, and so it kind of looks like I am. But working with all these great and talented people, so I've invited some of my friends to come and participate. So we're Tlingit, we're Haida, we're Blackfoot, and so it's just a really great sort of collaboration. Again, collaborating with music and bringing the language into the music. So there's Tlingit, Haida, and Yupik. We do traditional storytelling, and so we had a lot of fun creating all this work. And so I still, the band, we lost a few members of the group, but we continue to push on, and we found new members to help out. And so, yeah, for like 10 years now, we've been working on this music. And so I always tell everybody we're the biggest unknown band in the Northwest. We're a 10-piece group. But, I can't say enough about Bernie. He was just an amazing, amazing collaborator. He was such an intuitive musician. He brought a real special touch to all of this music that we did. And this is our singer, our new keyboard player. And then we just added this fellow here, who's Tlingit and African American. So he's grew up in Juneau, and he's a linguist, and he does rapping styles in Tlingit and English. And one of the founders of the group, Clarissa Rizal, she's a really super talented chilkat weaver and also a mentor to me, taught me a lot about the culture. She passed away in 2016, as well as Bernie, passed away in 2013. So it was a tough loss. So this is our group today. And I have a video. I know I'm going on and on here, but I was just going to play this
From the new album, Whoosh!
Just to close out the show.
Hey, we're bringing a brother up here, a nephew. This is our nephew here. Here, Chaz.
Who ik, for whom I speak. Take it up a peek. If confidence is key, don't be confidential. Like under compliments, so you got potential of going continental. With unity, you and me, using these communities, usually see mutiny to achieve peace. Orbiting north with no formal revenge, proportionate to the force, don't go over the edge. Equality is out their league, they can warm up the bench. When they want to see you speak, they will board your ship. Ku-ik, North Star, higher than the pulsar, fire in your cold heart, quicker than a sports car. North Star, you are the avatar, turn to pass an after party, don't need the alcohol. Ku-ik, Ku-ik, that is for whom I speak. Ku-ik, Ku-ik, this is performance of the week. Yeah.
Oh, this is spiritual warfare. Prayer warriors, get ready. Salada Suju's hot eye.
Jerech, achli tuch sakik, yakuik, antwanagu yusling gitch kafli. Would ya kunak just got quanak, nigawaya quanak dutch, fan stuga, hatati, would han de outati. It's a hunt to cut you on, good kayana ha. Blood at the gun, done a duck Wissington, Sikubu yagi yi, ha ani, Toots han, lekina, it's a han, Skuik. Ku-ik, for whom I speak. This is performance of the week,
This is spiritual warfare. Prayer warriors, get ready.
Spiritual. Warfare. Spiritual warfare. None of us want to go there, but we must do what we must do for the ones yet to come here. Each and every one of us has a duty here tonight. If you're listening, use your heart and do that shit right. Educate the next generation up and coming and lift them up with everything that you got and do something. Don't just stand back and be like, oh, that's so sad, man. Rise up and do what you can. Hey!
Get ready, get ready, get ready, rise up.
Do what you can.
Rise up, rise up, rise up. Get ready, rise up, rise up.
Do what you can.
Do the work now. Do the work now. Do the work now.
Great. So, anyway, I had to do it. I won't apologize. Thank you. So, that being said, I don't know if there's any questions or we're running out of time or. Yep. So.
Loved your presentation and love your art. Can you describe your sculptural process, how those works are created? Because I've seen glass blowing and I've seen lamp work, but I don't know how the sculptural work are created.
You know, it's either, straight up glass blowing if I'm making a vessel form, or generally I work with the glass on the wall thickness is much thicker than normal, and so it allows me to kind of bend it, shape it, hang it. I have these hot torches that can superheat, areas, and then I can manipulate and pull it in different ways. I usually don't use molds. In a couple of instances, some of these masks that have a real traditional shape to them, I have a form that I blow into, but then I can, carve different details into it. So, and then as I mentioned before about the sandblasting process, everything is drawn onto this, stencil material. It's cut out, exposing the areas that are going to be carved, and then sandblasted. So so it's a variety of different techniques, as well as the casting process, which is a lost wax casting. So the real traditional, totem pole forms that look like, a real totem, they're made from wood, and then they're transformed into wax, and then plaster cast around the wax. You melt the wax out, cast into the negative space. And but yeah, a lot of the stuff that I do is pretty much hand formed. So you just have different ways of, you have these inside tools you can sort of push up, and then you can sort of push back, and in a delicate way you can sort of control the shape. Just ran out of batteries, so. I knew I'd talk for so long. So hopefully that answers your question.
Hi there. So I just had a question about indigenous culture being very connected to the earth and led by the natural world, and if this is still holding true in your culture today, and if so, or not even if so, what are the feelings and thoughts surrounding technology?
Well, I think, we use technology in a lot of ways. I mean, and then the most disparaging kind of way, people are like, well, those, they're out there hunting, fishing with nets and stuff. They should get out there in their canoes. And it's like, the fact is that we're going to use the tools that we can use. So the golden age of Northwest Coast happened with the advent of steel tools from the Russians. So all of a sudden, are we going to use them? Of course we're going to use them. So we talk about technology on that level. We're using motorboats, we're using steel, we're using all of the chainsaws to rough out certain sections. I do believe that all of this came from the earth and this natural process of working with this material, and these materials are disappearing. For the big totem poles, for the dugout canoes and things, and so you're going to see new materials being adopted to keep the stories and symbols alive. To return to a completely archaic way of living, I don't think will ever happen. There's this whole land back, decolonize kind of movement going on, but it's like decolonize and then what? Well, first of all, it's never going to happen. Let's be honest, there's too much money at stake, and people that are in power are going to want to keep it. So, the whole kind of digressing here, but I feel like there is this connection to, when I went through the sweat lodge ceremony, that's a way of connecting with the natural powers that surround us, and tapping into ancestral spirit and thought process and all of that. So I think there's ceremonies that we do. I believe there is still a love of nature, but it's hard to impress that on anybody. And even when it comes to Native spirituality, natives aren't they're not out there trying to convince everybody that they should go do the sweat lodge. Some people would like you to adopt their religion and follow this or that, but when you find Native spirituality, it comes through a very natural process, which does not, preach upon you to, do this or that. But the deeper that you get into it, the more deeper understanding you have. So that's kind of how I think about some of that stuff.
Really enjoyed your presentation. Genetic memory representation, could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah, when I started, so I grew up outside of the Tlingit culture. I grew up in Seattle, very urban. When I started to tap into this understanding, and I did a lot of reading. I learned about my culture through books before I started to connect with people who could help me understand it in a different way. And what I have a keen interest in psychology, and in how it, the surrealists, they got into a lot of symbolism in their work, and there was a lot of psychoanalysis that was going on with that. So I think it led me to, how this all happened for me, I guess, goes all the way back to reading books. And as I mentioned, I wasn't really into, I wasn't raised with religious instruction. And so Carlos Castaneda was the first, kind of hippie spiritual thing that I kind of tapped into. And I feel like I learned a lot through that, even though it was sort of debunked, and he wasn't like running around with a Mexican shaman. He was kind of in an LA library, writing these books. But there's enough to it that there is actually something going on there, and he probably had some experiences with like peyote and stuff like that. But so I started to read Jung, and just kind of a layman's book on Jung, and I came to understand that there was these archetypes within our mind and our psyche that we can map out. And so when I started to apply myself to learning about my artwork and my cultural artwork and the mythologies and all the symbolism that was wrapped into it, then I started to really internalize it and feel like there was this genetic memory that I had this aptitude to actually make these drawings and construct them anew. I mean, there's a lot of rules and regulations to the design system, and so I pushed myself to do that. And when I was up at Pilchuck Glass School and we were doing the totem pole and we were doing the sweat lodge ceremony, and I came out, in the evening times. We had elders that had come down from Alaska, and they were singing. They were there for the installation ceremony and all that. And after dinner, we were all sitting around, like maybe we're going to go work it, or go hang out or whatever. And they're singing this Tlingit song in the courtyard, and they were just sitting out there, and people were kind of gathering around them. And I walked out to the quad where they were sitting, and it was beautiful summer evening, and it was like, it just hit me like this sense of deja vu. And I hadn't had that feeling for a long time or since then. And for me, it felt like this was the epiphany. This is where I felt like I am where I am supposed to be. I'm sort of living my dharma, or whatever you want to call it. And so the more deeply I connected to it, the more things are revealed to me. So that's it in a nutshell. One more question I can. I guess we have one up here. We also have one up.
Hi, I'm curious how the current climate situation is affecting your people and where you see it going in the future.
Boy, I'm not a scientist, but I know it. Like I mentioned, there's a shortage of resources up in Alaska, especially for, as I mentioned earlier, the dugout canoes and the large totem poles. And so, if you're talking about much further north, I have no real knowledge of that, because that's up in the vast frozen tundra and the North Shore, or the northern slope. And I know that the things are getting more severe there. But I think that's where I kind of felt, and in speaking with Joe David, he was the one that pointed out that these natural resources are becoming more and more scarce for basket weaving, for all of the aforementioned things. And so that's why we're going to use the technology, and Native cultures should be allowed to use the technology and to be creative in new ways. And so I kind of feel like I do have a big mantle, this sort of platform to stand on, because I've been doing it for so long. But I like to think that if I'm successful with my work, I will have inspired the next generation to try something new. And so, yeah, that's the only way I can really answer that question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. We have a reception to your left in the FJC dining rooms, so please join us. And Preston will be happy to answer some more questions there. Thank you for coming. Good night.